Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the September meeting of the Finance Committee to order, please. Doug, are there any public speakers?
Yes, I believe we have one public speaker, Murray Bowden.
Morning. I'm not sure how to do this today. Finance Committee is about money. What do you do when millions and tens of millions of dollars are going down a drain because nobody's paying attention? I don't have to be polite, as Chuck was at the Bridges and Tunnels. Bridges and Tunnels is wasting tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars because of incompetence. Chuck was very polite when he spoke about it before. I've talked about it many times before. And if they can't get the Henry Hudson Bridge, a little bitty nothing, how are they going to do the Verrazano and the tolls? Or the Brax-Wystone and the tolls? Or the Trogsek and the tolls? There is no such thing as a toll plaza. It's finished. Tolls are collected. They can be collected anywhere. On a New York State thruway, the toll plaza is gone. The gantry is in Rockland County. It's a gantry. It's not a plaza. It doesn't need a sign. The New Jersey Turnpike on the western section took all the signs down because tolls are collected and they don't need anybody to slow down. The New York State Thruway took all the signs down and it says keep going. As it happens, they took the signs down because I suggested it. I meet with the Thruway on a regular basis. I meet with the Turnpike on a regular basis. I speak at the Port Authority and I know them. Nobody in Bridges and Tunnels has the guts to meet with me. I'm a terror. I'm this horrible, horrible person. Look at me. I'm all alone. I'm 82 years old. I got to use a stick because my arm went bad from using the cane so long. Tom, I don't know how you deal with the censored at the Bridges and Tunnels. I mean, I have to censor myself because I don't want to this is on video, and this nice gentleman is in the back there, and I wish he would stand over there because when my grandchildren look at my picture and I see him. There is a problem. Oh, and I meet with New York City DOT, and they're very attentive, and they're very good. So the only people I can't meet with at Bridges and Tunnels, I can now meet with other units at the MTA. The answer is if they're afraid to meet with me, what's going on? I'm only one person, I have no organization, and they haven't got the guts to sit down at a table on the record and discuss planning going forward. They can't get in their heads there is no such thing as a toll plaza. Take the sign down.
Thank you, sir. Next, please have the approval of the July 20th minutes. May I please have a motion? Second. Any discussion? All is in favor? Aye. Next is budget excuse me, Doug, could you take us through the work plan, please?
Yes, sir. There's one change to the work plan. The annual fuel hedge program report will no longer be a separate report. It'll be presented in October and included in the annual review of MTA's derivative portfolio.
Next is budget watch, Doug.
Thanks. This month's budget watch, we're going to look at results against August, operating results against August, and subsidy results through September. At this time, we start comparing with the mid-year forecast rather than the budget. That mid-year forecast was part of the July financial plan. So the mid-year forecast, just to refresh your memory, included some net favorable trends from the first half of 2015. Those trends included higher real estate transaction taxes, favorable toll and passenger revenue, lower costs for energy and pensions. The forecast also included expense increases from important operational investments, and also impacts of severe winter weather and a rebaselining of overtime to reflect the more realistic requirements that we were seeing. I'm going to first start talking about the month of August. Preliminary net results against the mid-year forecast were positive for the month. August operating results were favorable. Operating expenses were $38.6 million, or 4.7% favorable, although a lot of that was timing, especially in the areas of OTPS. Overtime, good news, was slightly favorable for the month. Toll revenue was $5.1 million, or 3.1% favorable. Passenger revenue was $2.6 million, or 0.5% unfavorable. Moving to subsidies, real estate transaction taxes were $22.5 million, or 23.4% favorable. Debt service was $5.8 million favorable due to lower than projected variable rates. There were a couple of negative impacts on the month. PBT, the petroleum business tax, was $9.0 million, or 14.9% unfavorable. And PMT was $8.7 million, or 11.5% unfavorable. For the PBT and the PMT, we do think a lot of that was timing, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. The year-to-date results also against the mid-year forecast, also positive. Favorable results include operating expenses, which were $105 million, or 1.5% favorable. Again, a lot of that was timing-related variances, but we also have seen some energy savings, vacancies, and some modestly lower overtime costs. Real estate transaction taxes year-to-date were $28 million, or 2.7% favorable. That's on the MRT and the urban tax in both instances. Toll revenue, $17 million, or 1.4% favorable. Debt service was $28 million favorable, which is 1.7%. Some of that is timing. A lot of that is lower variable rates. The only significant unfavorable result also for the month was the petroleum business tax, which was $17 million, or 3.7% unfavorable. Again, we think timing is playing a large role in that. So overall, we're doing better than the plan across the board, although much of the reduction in expenses can be attributed to timing. I want to caution you on the real estate transaction taxes. While they've been favorable, we've had two unfavorable real property transfer tax collections in the last 2 months, two of the last 3 months. So we have to just be careful with that. We'll be watching these trends as we prepare to update the 2015 for the November financial plan. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Doug, how's the reduction in fuel prices affecting our fuel hedging program?
Well, what happens is we're locking in these lower prices for future hedges going forward, but obviously each transaction would result in probably a loss on that specific hedge trade, right, for that. So while overall we're saving money on the operation side, we would be offsetting some of that with losses on the hedges, but that's been the plan all along because you're always hedging, years forward. So you have a series of hedges that, predate now and going forward, and the whole point of that is to kind of smooth that impact on the financial plan. But obviously, if you have a month with very low fuel prices, in that given month, the hedge is going to be unfavorable, but you're saving a lot more in the actual operating, costs that we're experiencing.
So what's the magnitude of where we are as we net out?
So we have a report that's in the committee materials. It's on page 134 of your committee materials, and that gives us a summary of how the hedges have performed. So as the annual impact as of September 8th, 2015, is that the current prices versus the budget is, the impact of the hedge is a negative 43.990 million. However, on a net basis, factoring in all the hedges that come due in a month, it's a 23.595 million. That's on ultra-low sulfur diesel hedging. So then we have a breakout for the compressed natural gas, the CNG, which we do for the obviously for the bus fleet. On a summary basis, combining both the ULSD and the compressed natural gas, the net impact is 21.7 million. And we'll go into greater favorable, and we'll go into greater detail into this next month on the impacts. But as Doug pointed out, where prices are declining, you're a net payer on the hedges. However, we take a view that this is 50% hedge for the next 12 months with declining hedge percentages for the remaining 12. So for our window of hedging is 24 months. And you know, like I said, we'll get into more depth in the report.
But if I could just kind of summarize, because we hedge 50% of our gallonage, when prices are falling, we're getting a positive benefit on 50% of our budget. And then we're paying a higher price because we've locked in prices, you know, on a rolling basis from years back or months back. However, we're now locking in prices for the future at this very low rate. So the whole idea, again, was stability in our budget, not speculation. But net, as Pat said, our budget has a favorable variance right now, about 22 million. Yep.
Okay.
Next would be Finance Watch. Pat?
Okay, thank you.
Doug,
Oh, yes, sir.
quick question on the,
The mic, Mr. Bellin.
sorry. Yeah, quick question on the real estate taxes being
Sure.
ahead of the 2014 levels.
Yes.
What are they versus is that the expected or that must be
Those
the
are-
actual?
those are
So what is
actually-
it versus the expected budget for this year?
We have both of that all that information in Budget Watch. So
Right.
So the first page is against the budget, and we are, well, so we're doing it against a mid-year forecast, right? So we upped the real estate forecast considerably in the mid-year forecast. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a healthy increase. So against the revised forecast, which we're calling the mid-year forecast, we are year-to-date $27.6 million favorable. That's against the mid-year forecast.
Okay.
So
I
against
know
the actual, against last year, we're $202 million favorable. for
Okay,
the
so
same
we have to be
period.
very careful keeping that in mind because the volatility
That's
of
right.
that tax could turn against us.
Yeah, that's exactly correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Finance Watch appears starts on page 18 of your committee materials. Just a recap, we did receive an upgrade from Fitch Ratings on MTA's dedicated tax fund bonds on July 31st, and that was an increase from AA- to AA. And really that, I credit my staff with really pushing Fitch to recognize the strengths of that credit, as well as the strength of the state of New York, which where those taxes are derived, supporting the credit. Next, we have two transactions which I'd like to report together. This is the Transportation Revenue Refunding Bonds 2015C and the Transportation Revenue Refunding Bonds 2015D. These two transactions collectively refunded $1,067 million of higher coupon transportation revenue bonds that were outstanding. On a combined basis, the all-in true interest cost of the transactions was at 3.65%. The present value savings of the transactions were $167 million, or 15.6% of the refunded bonds. So the first transaction was senior managed by Siebert Branford Shank and Morgan Stanley. They're a joint venture underwriter. And the second transaction was senior managed by Goldman Sachs. There's a lot of other statistics in the report, but those are the highlights that I wanted to make sure you had. Next, we had a refunding, I should say a remarketing of TBTA general revenue variable rate bonds 2001C. And this was a credit substitution where we replaced an exiting bank with a new bank, Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi. And that transaction is doing very well in the market. The initial rate set was 1 basis point. We also have another credit substitution and remarketing. These are the transportation revenue variable rate bonds 2005 E1 and E3. And as you can see here, existing letters of credit were expiring by their terms, and they were replaced with new letter of credit providers. Next, we have a commercial paper takeout and new money transaction. This is $650 million of MTA transportation revenue variable rate bonds, Series 2015E. As you can see here, there were multiple components, the E1 through the E5, and each component represented a letter of credit, and those letters of credit providers were U.S. Bank, Bank of Tokyo, Mitsubishi, Citigroup, Bank of the West, and again, U.S. Bank on the E5s. This transaction paid off existing commercial paper, which we had to do because that expired by its terms after 5 years. And we also were able to include $100 million of new money, which we always need for our ongoing capital needs. Next, we have the $500 million MTA dedicated tax fund bond anticipation notes, Series 2015A. And as you can see here, we offered this for competitive bidding. We had a great deal of activity for the notes. We allowed bids to be submitted in increments of 10 million. So we really, the goal was to have wide participation from large as well as small firms in our group. And as you can see here, the all-in true interest cost of the transaction was 0.39% with an average coupon of 75 basis points. And as you can see on the next page, the largest of the bids was $200 million submitted by Morgan Stanley. At the lowest cost, that was 0.193%, and ranging to the most expensive bid at 0.198% submitted by Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So very tight, very aggressive bidding for the notes, and we were very pleased with how that transaction worked. The notes come due next June, and at that time, prior to that, we'll take them out with long-term bonds. And I think this is a good opportunity to just note that, for our ongoing new money issuance, the bond anticipation note strategy is something that we're going to be using for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very low cost for short-term financing of our capital program, the bond finance portion of the capital program. And secondly, it gives us better clarity, better insight into the projects that are being financed. Because the capital program is so wide and expansive and covers all the agencies, when we're performing our tax analysis, it's better to have a sense of what you're financing. And so when we take those notes out with long-term bonds, we know that the specific assets that were financed, their useful lives, what agency they were attributed to, and so forth. So that's a strategy that you'll see us coming to you more frequently.
The significance to that is we try to match more closely the life of the asset and the linked final maturity of the debt that we're selling. Typically, we just sell 30-year debt with level debt service. So basically, it has what we call an average life of something less than 20 years. But as you know, when we're doing East Side Access or when we're doing 2nd Avenue Subway or when we're doing some of our mega projects, these are assets that can have 50, 75, 100 years of life. This enables us to be able to say, you know what, instead of doing 30 years, we might be able to do 35 years of level debt service or 40 years of level debt service. So what it does is it helps us to really, from a public policy standpoint, do a better matching of those who benefit and those who pay. But unless we know what the projects are that we've actually financed, we really have no justification for going beyond what we traditionally do, which is just 30-year level debt service. So this strategy helps us to accomplish, not for our whole program, but for some of our projects to finance the debt on a slightly longer average life.
Thank you.
Pat?
Sure.
You had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I just want to note that the PV savings on the refundings are extraordinarily high, and that's great work. So thanks. I mean, it's, when you think about it, 3% is our requirement, and you're up at 14, 15, 17%. Those are great deals to the benefit of all of us. And the only other thing I wanted to point out is, unfortunately, the commercial paper takeout and new money. I note that the state bond issuance fee was significantly more than twice what the fee is for all the people who do all the work putting together the transaction and then risking their capital on the transaction. And I just want to make sure that's not first of all, a misprint, that it was almost $5.5 million we paid the state for the right to issue bonds that are allowed principally because of the federal tax code.
That is correct. The state bond issuance fee was $5.4 million. I would just note that when we issued the commercial paper 5 years ago, we did not pay a state bond fee on that, and that's been the practice. We don't pay the bond.
Well, we don't pay on notes.
We don't pay on notes.
Commercial paper or refundings, but we pay on new money, right?
We pay on new money or takeout of notes.
Right.
Mr. Capelli?
Yeah, on that subject, in July, you had said that you were going to inquire as to whether the state was going to continue to not charge us that fee on, I guess, refinance debt.
So, to answer your question, we did receive I think it was reported at the last meeting that the state did waive the bond issuance fee on all the refunding bonds. So as you note in the 2015 Cs and Ds, we did not pay a state bond issuance fee there. As for new money issues going forward and note takeout issues going forward, we have been advised that the state is going to continue to expect to receive the fee.
So would that mean that for this new capital budget, whatever it ends up being, 28, 26, $27 billion, the state is going to charge us a fee for that entire project?
That is what we would anticipate.
For the debt component of the project.
For the bond issue.
Right. Disgraceful.
Okay, so the last two items in the finance report are the fuel hedging program. On July 30th, we executed a diesel fuel hedge of 2.9 million gallons of ULSD. The winning bid submitted by Merrill Lynch Commodities, Inc. at an all-in price of $1.81 per gallon. Next was on August 27th, we issued another hedge for 2.9 million gallons of ULSD. And there, again, we saw prices come down, and the winning price was 1.66 per gallon. And again, Merrill Lynch Commodities, Inc. Was the winning bid on that transaction. And that concludes Finance Watch. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Next, we're moving to MTA headquarters and all agency items. We've pulled the approval of the remarketing agent item, so that's no longer in the agenda. The remaining item is a resolution to authorize the execution, filing, and acceptance of federal funds for the fiscal year 2015 and 2016 by the chairman and chief executive officer or any of his designees. Need a motion.
Need a motion? Second? Any comments, questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay, there are three report and information items. The first is the contract change order report for the second quarter 2015, which is on page 45. Also included is a capital contract change order, which is also reported to the CPOC committee. The second information item is the draft of the independent accountant's review report of MTA financial statements for the 3 months ended June 30th, 2015, which is on director's desk. It'll be presented and voted at the audit committee meeting on Thursday, September 24th, 2015. The third item is the 2016 preliminary budget July financial plan 2016 to 2019. Those materials were previously distributed. Basically, it's the July financial plan that Bob presented in July. It just, we put it on the agenda in September and October should an outside party, public want to opine on that. It would give them the opportunity to do so. Next, we're going to move to procurements. We have 13 competitive procurements for headquarters for miscellaneous personal service contracts for a total of $40,469,000.
May I have a motion? Second? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay, we have one ratification to award a non-competitive personal services contract for $269,000.
May I have a motion? Second? Any comments, questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay, we're moving to the Metro North and Long Island Railroad Committee section. There are 4 procurements from Metro North, 3 being non-competitive and 1 competitive for a grand total of $9,484,000.
Motion? Second? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There's 1 competitive procurement for Long Island Railroad for a total of $10 million.
Motion? Second? Comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay, moving to New York City Transit MTA bus operations. There's 1 action item for New York City Transit requesting board approval to extend the current on-the-go travel station kiosk pilot for a total of 12 months. It'll expand the total number of kiosks permitted to be installed to 325 units, which is up from the current 145 units.
Any
sir.
comments or questions? Mr.
Yeah,
Ballin?
Similar to the earlier committee, I recuse on that one. And also, I was trying to, I didn't want to slow the momentum, recuse on the earlier award, as I did in committee on the Bombardier matter. That's 2 recusals.
Okay.
We'll note that.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
Very good. Okay, we have 3 competitive procurements for RFPs. This is transit as well, for a grand total of $865,846,000.
Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay. Moving to bridges and tunnels, there are 4 competitive procurements for modifications to existing agreements for a grand total of $3,348,000.
Motion? Second? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
Okay, there are no items for FIMTAC. Just want to note that included within the book in your package were June and July results versus the mid-year forecast, since we had missed a month. And it also includes the 12-month allocation of the mid-year forecast, and that's what we're now reporting against. And now we would move to the real estate agenda portion.
Thanks, Doug. Excuse me. Good afternoon. We have 8 action items this month, including 7 transactions that are described in staff summaries. I'd be glad to answer questions about any of them. The 8th item is a housekeeping matter. You'll note that one of the transactions literally involved our getting an easement for no compensation. We pay nothing for it, but we searched in vain for a board policy that would enable us to do that as an info item, so we thought we would propose a process for us to spend less than $15,000 to acquire temporary or permanent easements for in furtherance of transit operations. So unless there are any questions, I'd ask for approval of the 8 items.
Let's have a motion. Motion? Second? Comments, questions now? Mr. Ballin was up first.
I just wanted to, again, thank you.
Okay.
Recuse on F.
Thank you. Mr. Albert?
Does the positive train control item for the Arch Street yard, does that lengthen the time that trains are likely to be in the yard, or does it make no difference?
My understanding is that that facility will not be needed by Long Island Railroad until East Side Access. So this is making beneficial use of a specialized facility that the likes of which Metro North does not have. I believe it will speed up the contract.
Okay, thanks.
Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Before we go into executive session, I'd like the Finance Committee to know that we need to move on with the capital program, so I've directed the staff in finance and capital programs to incorporate all the revisions that were part of the discussions with stakeholders, as well as to align with the current commitment of the city of $657 million, and we'll come forward with a recommendation in the October board cycle for that to be approved. It's a very important item for us. Ms. Rottenberg.
I just want to clarify, Mr. Chairman, a little more detail about what you are asking the staff to do here.
In the program that we submitted about a year ago to the Capital Program Review Board was a program that was $32 billion, but the actual submission to CPRB was $29 billion because the bridge and tunnel piece was self-funded. The issue is never brought up during the legislative session, but there were discussions following the legislative session. And in those discussions with the Chamber and the Division of Budget, we have agreed to apply procurement methodologies, design, build, et cetera, to take about 6 to 8% of the cost out of the program with the same scope. So those discussions left us with a plan about $26.8 billion, with a commitment from the state for 8.3. The MTA has upped its commitment by, I believe, 2.4 billion, so we're now at 14.6, and the city is still at 657. So we had asked the city for 3.2, and you know that dialogue. So if we're going to submit a plan that the board has to approve, we need to be in alignment with the commitments that have been made so far. So the $26.8 billion number would have to come down in cost and scope to align with the difference between the $3.2 billion and the $657 million. And that's what I've asked the staff to do, come up with alternatives to be able to do that, bring that forward to the board so that we could have a discussion and a vote so that we can resubmit the plan to the Capital Program Review Board. The legislative process, the second time we submit, is there's a 30-day window for any one of the members to veto the plan. If not, then it would go forward, and then we would be able to continue making awards on the contract. So that's literally what I've asked the finance and capital program staff to do.
Can you give us just a little more clarity on the criteria you've given the staff for looking at those different scenarios?
What we're looking at is looking at the urban portion of it, New York City Transit. If you remember, in terms of the criteria with which we applied as we were having discussions before we got to the latest round, when we weren't sure what the appetite was for all the stakeholders in the region with respect to a $29 billion plan, is we build from the bottom up. So state of good repair is critical safety and reliability issues need to be funded first. And then the next area is enhancement, improving the level and quality service, and expansion third. So the staff will look at, in a general sense, applying it in backward fashion. So cuts in the expansion part of the program before you get to enhance, and holding as true as you can the state of good repair portion of the program.
But only within one jurisdiction.
Yes, the urban portion.
Yeah,
New York City
I
Transit.
guess I have to have a request here, and I hope my fellow board members will join me on this. I think it is punitive and pretty divisive to say, if for whatever reason the MTA is unable to get all the funding it needs for its capital plan, and as you said yourself, a year has gone by in Albany and we haven't gotten a nickel, so I don't know that there's any completely clear path yet up in Albany. I think that the staff should look at if different scenarios, if you don't get all the funding you'd hope for, that would not be focused on one jurisdiction, but would be focused on the broad criteria. The things that I think you all use when you look at your capital investments: ridership, economic impact, project readiness, perhaps potential loss of federal funds, and that should not be applied only to one jurisdiction. And I think the staff should maybe you want them to do a New York City only scenario, but I would really like them to see them do a regional scenario.
We can do that, and I can direct them to do that, and we can take it up for discussion. If that's what the interest of the board has, I don't have a problem with that, because certainly before the issue gets voted, we need to vet all the issues. Mr. Kay?
If I may, on that point, Mr. Chairman, which is the sense of the board. I obviously can't speak for the sense of the board, but I'd like to add my 2 cents to that. We've heard a lot of numbers thrown around. I've heard 80% of assets in New York City, 73% of the budget is supported by New York City residents. I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but 68-32 may or may not be the TBTA splits these days. I don't know. 70-30 or 60-40 might be the share of the capital plan. I think there's 15 voting members and we need 8 to pass. These are all numbers that we haven't really grasped or put our heads around, frankly, in the last 10 years since I've here. When I came here, I had to memorize all of these things. I used to know them. How much does Nassau County owe the MTA because they haven't paid for their buses forever, right? How much does the city put in and how much does it get back? I know my friends in upstate, our quarter pounders, have numbers in the back of their heads that I guarantee they know that they haven't whispered in the last 10 years. We've always looked at this from a very regional perspective. I think it is extremely important now more than ever to continue to do that. I've always said the capital plan is always, and everyone knows this, it is the biggest political game, unfortunately, in Albany. And at the end of the day, we have to support the riders. We have, to the extent possible, stay above the fray, look at this from a very regional perspective, and stand up for the system. So I say all this because we're continuing to enter this political season. We all know we can't issue debt based on a press release without seeing a full plan. We also know that no matter what money we get from Albany or the city or from our other funding partners is not going to reduce the fares. We have to have some reality here. And so as we continue these discussions and as staff continues to work them, I do want to support Commissioner Trottenberg and others in their sense. We need to stay as unified as possible. Mr. Chairman, you've done a tremendous job getting people in Albany and the public generally aware of our problem. And I think it shows great leadership that the governor stepped up and said, we know there's a problem. We're willing to stick this forward and commit to the state. We just need to get to the finish line. And I really implore everyone to get there with all of our funding partners and to sort of stay above this and really try to protect the region and the MTA, because it doesn't stop. Whether it's in the city, whether it's out of the city, whether it's upstate, whether it's the suburbs of Long Island, everyone benefits, the entire region benefits. And I'd like to continue that mutual regional harmony we've had at least the last 10 years that I've been here at this board. Thanks.
Can I just add one more comment?
Excuse me, we'll come back.
Okay.
Did you have a comment, Mr. Farrar?
Mr. Chairman, I regret to recall that we are in the same place that I thought we might be when we approved this plan, which is we come up short, and then it is inevitable. I do not possess a degree in advanced mathematics, but I can count. It's inevitable that somebody will say, that some bodies will say, this is the project that's got to go. I have my own sense of what that might look like, but I would like to hear what the finance and capital staff come back with. But know that the consequence of not fully funding this capital program is that something goes. Not 2%, not 3%, not 6%, not 9.75%. Something big that we all care about goes. That's just the way this is. I would hope that we all can find some common and higher ground to get to a conclusion about this, because I choose not to believe what I read about how our public comments are parsed. I don't think it makes an awful lot of sense. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to say, well, maybe fares can go down if we come up with, a little money. Huh? How did that become part of the equation, unless we're talking about an awful lot of money? I just think we owe the riding public some candor here and some clarity and direction. And we got to know that there are consequences to all the decisions that we all make. Consequences with respect to funding, consequences with respect to policy. I would hate to see, Mr. Chairman, a couple of these projects fall off the table, especially since riding public has been promised them for a long time, in one or two cases for longer than I have been alive. So I just think we've got to be really careful about how we characterize things. I applaud you for asking for as dispassionate an assessment of this as we can get, but this is the moment when we all have to be responsible in our rhetoric. And even more responsible to the riders who depend on us and our stewardship of the system.
Mr. Pelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to support Commissioner Trottenberg's request. While many of us represent outlying counties proudly, we also represent all of the riders of this system, regardless of where they come from or where they end up. And many times, they don't know one jurisdictional line from another, nor should we entail one jurisdictional line from another. That's not the way the system was created. That's not the way the system succeeds and has succeeded over the last 45, 50 years now. And that's not the way it's going to succeed in this capital plan or the next capital plan or the capital plan after that. So while I fully, this was a activity we had all hoped to avoid in regard to what has to come out. We've had that conversation. We're all hopeful that nothing will have to come out. But when those decisions are made, if they get made, and we hope that they don't have to get made, they should be made on the basis of priorities of the region rather than where the project happens to be located. So I would support her request for that type of analysis. Then when we have that type of analysis, if and when we have to make that decision, we'll all make it collectively together in that regard. But I would support her call for that type of analysis.
Mr. Capelli?
Yeah, I'll associate myself with Mr. Paley's remarks and with Commissioner Kay. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Trottenberg?
Thank you, my colleagues on the board. And look, I just want to say, again, the city does treasure its relationship with the MTA and with you, Mr. Chairman. And, yes, I think my colleague is right. The rhetoric's getting hot, but I want to, state on behalf of the mayor and myself, we stand ready to sit down and really talk and try and come to a solution here. We agree we need to have a collective solution. None of us want to see any projects cut. We all want to see this capital plan go forward. I'll close with a wonderful quote from your op-ed in the Daily News. Every member of our board is keenly aware that improving and expanding the subways is key to the vitality of the entire state. I think I share that sentiment. Thank you.
Ms. Metzger?
I appreciate what every board member has said. We've always tried to work from a perspective of fairness, but it's a false assumption to believe that the way we've spent the money has always been viewed as fair by everyone across the region. It has not necessarily been fair. That said, I'm conflicted. I know that all of my board members are right, that what we do is most important, and I'm sure we're going to make a good decision when we do.
As I've stated many times, I'm one member of this board. Yes, I'm its chair, but I listen to what the board members ask for, and I will direct the staff to take a look at those alternatives that way. I'd be remiss, though, if I didn't say, because I think Susan mentioned it, we've closed many capital programs with the inclusion of singular projects for a variety of different reasons. 3 times we closed the capital program with a third depot in Staten Island, the rebuilding of the Franklin Avenue shuttle. So we will take those decisions, we will take that information, and we will make a decision as a board. I would like to add, though, because my sense of frustration and concern about not having a program, because it is a year, this is the longest we've ever gone without a capital program, weighs on me very heavily. There are critical projects out there that need to go forward. Some are state of good repair with infrastructure, some are expand and enhance, and others, enhance and others are expand. It would be a sad day if we don't have another day like the opening of 7 West, because that was truly a good day. But I would take that decision that I would with respect to not having things fall down. So I will direct the staff to do that. We'll bring those forward. We'll try to make it as concise as possible in terms of the alternatives so the board can make an informed decision. But what I'm really asking is that we close the board cycle in October with an approved program that we can submit to the Capital Program Review Board. Mr. Kay?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I really want you to have the last word. I want to caution, how can we do that if Albany's not in session and we don't know what we're going to get? At the end of the day, CPRB can approve everything, but we can't issue debt unless we know there's money actually coming, and we can't do that outside the legislative process. So I only suggest that we need to keep that in mind. And it's fine, we've done it before, where we move CPRB with the understanding that funding will be there come January, and I'm cool with that. And so maybe I take back my statement about they need to be there. But we need to know exactly what's going to happen in order for us to approve that. I just put that in context. So as much as the frustration is that you have, which we all agree, I want to make sure the frustration is directed in the right direction to our funding partners, not necessarily on the portion of the board to move forward with the plan that staff puts forward. I apologize. I really wanted to leave with the last word. And I think I agree everything with what you said. I just want to remember what we're looking at here. We need to see details.
I guess I'm a little confused now, Mr. Kay, because I think when we closed, before we closed the 10 through 14 program,
yes,
we had an approved program with scope and funding certain for 2 years, and we had to go back to the legislature for the final 3 years.
Okay, fine. I don't know if we have funding certain.
I guess our funding is certain for the $14.6 billion, but we can't spend $1 of it without an approved program. Is that correct, Mr. Foran?
Yes. Then I stand corrected. If there is funding certainty for what we approve, then you're 100%
Because
right.
we can't spend $1 of that. We can't bond $1 until we have an approved program.
Agreed.
So 1 or 2 more comments, because I'd like to get on with the executive session. Mr. Albert?
Does the current delay in approval jeopardize our federal funding on any of our projects?
I don't know the answer to that, but I will get an answer for you when we bring the issue forward in October.
Thank you.
And if there are other items of concern people have, don't consider this be the last time you can make the ask. So make the ask, because I'm putting together this because I'd really like to advance this forward so we can have that informed discussion. And as we always do, we take a decision and we move forward.
But I just need to have clarity on that. I think Mr. Kay's point that we can't issue debt, you retracted that, right? I'm trying to follow. Because we can, my understanding is we can issue debt.
If we have our own funding, so I've been mistaken that obviously the MTA can issue its own debt, then fine. But I just want to make sure if we approve a plan then, that we're limited to just what we can fund on our own and not assume that our funding partner is going to come through with the rest based on promises. That was my point. I understand.
I think there's a difference. Without an approved plan,
I recognize that.
we cannot issue any debt for any project or pay for anything.
Totally.
Once we have an approved plan of whatever number that is, within the plan,
Yep.
we can spend our $14.5 billion. But without a plan, we can't spend even our own money. I think that's the point, Mr. Brent, right?
That is the point, Mr. Powell.
Right.
Okay, I want a clarification. And the last point is that we have the fiduciary duty to the whole authority, not just to those who appoint us. And I would, that's the legal duty. And I would just say that I think that for that reason and for others, I will support the chairman and what he suggests, as you've refined it.
Okay. So now I'd like to have a motion to go into executive session. So moved. Second. All in favor?
Aye.